Good afternoon. This is Steve Gladys and Steve Gladys Leadership Interviews and today's interview is with Chris Yoko of YokoCo, a digital marketing company. Chris, good to see you today. How are you doing?
Doing well. Thanks for having me, Steve.
So, Chris, you've got a pretty interesting company. Tell us a little bit about the company itself. What do you guys do?
So we call ourselves a web presence management firm. So we help organizations, the way we phrase it is ones that have a passion or purpose beyond just profit, basically use the longest lever available to them to make that impact on the world. And we consider their web presence the longest lever.
So is there some kind of is there both a personal and altruistic thing there? Did I hear that, or am I just making that up?
No, not at all. So there is definitely a lot of personal alignment. We found ourselves, it was back in like 2014, working with, you get started, you just work with whoever is willing to hand you some money to do some stuff. So we were working on whatever we could. And around 2014, felt like some of our clients we were super excited to work with. We'd have internal conversations about how excited we were about them. And then there were others we were just like, maybe we change our names and we move to Mexico. And like, that's the end of this. And ultimately what we realized is we were just really excited about it started with purpose. And a lot of it came out to there being a good alignment with what we wanted to achieve, me and the team that was here, with our personal lives and the legacy we wanted to leave. We all basically had kind of the same philosophy of wanting to be able to establish and drive continuous positive progress. And I guess how you define positive is probably going to be the catch point there. But then some of our clients had, really well articulated missions or aspired to do really well. And maybe we were helping them articulate it. And then the others, it was purely, revenue or profit play. So that was all they were focused on. And like, of course, like the economy and the money make stuff move, but like, we like to think a little bit past that. Or if you're a fan of Bruce Lee, he used to say, you punch through your target if you really want to hit as hard as you can. And so you got to kind of punch through profit is the way that we think about it. And so at that point we decided, let's only work with people that excite us and are aligned with our, philosophies. And what we found is it also seems to attract people that are pretty like-minded and we get along with. And so sometimes the challenge is making sure you've got enough diversity to have different perspectives and really think about all the different ways to approach a problem. So something we're mindful of, but we like to work with people that, want to have a positive impact in the world.
So sometimes how well-intentioned is you can be so much aligned that sometimes you need an outside point of view saying, yeah, that's right, but we need to pay attention to this or pay attention to that.
Absolutely. You can get so excited where you're like, yes, that's the mission. Like, that's what we're going to do. And this is great. And everyone's heads are nodding. And they're like, maybe we should apply a little bit of cognitive friction here just to make sure we're doing this the right way, the best way. And you need different perspectives to make that happen.
Yeah. Some groups apply the devil's advocate. They make one guy the devil's advocate. Tell us why we're wrong here. What are we doing wrong? You get permission to talk about what's negative. So at your height of your company, how many people did you have? I know you've gone through some changes. Did you have a certain number of people?
So we had just around 20 full-time members. And then if you include, like contract staff, probably another 60 to 80, depending on what was going on.
And so what did COVID-19 do to you? It's changed just about everybody. I'm guessing it changed you.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so it obviously, slammed the brakes on the economy. And so we had to do some, I think one person referred to it as like right sizing, which was painful. Just because we're a pretty tight-knit team and obviously we're all working towards the same stuff. So it's hard to make those decisions. And so, we reduced the size of the team to kind of acclimate to, kind of what the market conditions were. And then from there being able to think about the way that we're structured and what we can do to really make sure we're as efficient as possible and what kind of things can you do to, as much as possible, insulate yourself, from things like this. But obviously that's always a balancing act because as we saw with hospitals, it was like, oh, you have all these empty beds. Like, what are you using these for? That's wasteful, excess capacity. But then whenever you need them, you need them. And so it's kind of the same thing across the entirety of, all businesses is, how lean do you want the supply chain to be and how much do you want to be just in time versus how much elasticity do you want to have? And while, we're not a hardware or a product shop, we're more of a service thing. You also only have so much elasticity in terms of how much time and attention you can give to anybody. So we've got to be mindful of those things as well.
Yeah, you mentioned something that was interesting that triggered something in my mind. You mentioned structure. And some of the research says that structure determines behavior. that if you get the right structure of a team in place, you're more likely long-term to get the outcomes that you really want, which are, meeting goals and meeting expectations. That structure dictates behavior. And I wonder if you've ever, I never thought of it that way, to be honest with you, till I heard somebody explaining the research. Is that, how does that strike you? I just, random question.
No, that it really resonates, especially right now, because we were thinking about like, okay, how do we structure things? Because it's interesting. So we kind of tried to model our culture after not only our personal stuff, but then we looked at successful organizations across the board. And the ones that we really saw a kinship with was, Netflix. When they published their culture deck, we were like, oh, there's some wonderful parts of that we want to be a part of our DNA. Costco, like kind of the blue collar, roll up your sleeves. Oh, there we go.
I reviewed it. I know. So one of my friends is the guy that published this. And
oh, really?
Yeah. And asked me to review it. It's a great book. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. Patty's a fantastic, I just thought expertise there. Yeah. So they were one of them, Costco, like kind of the blue collar mentality. I loved a story that I'd heard about when Costco was meeting, the CEO of Costco was meeting with the CEO of, I think it was Amex. Yeah. About like continuing their credit card partnership. And he basically, the Amex guy like has a forward team fly out and like literally videotape the exact path he's going to walk through. And like he picked out like an outfit, and the Costco guy basically like shows up. He's like in like jeans and a collared shirt. And he's like, I don't think we should do business together anymore. And turns, waltzes out, and they've done like all this prep work. But just we're all people, and kind of keeping that equivalency in mind. And then Zappos with the kind of flat structure.
Yeah, I know.
Think about structure. We're like, oh, we're small, like flat is the default like nature of the way that will work. And so we made some assumptions about as we grew, how that would work, and that as long as we like kind of leave it, it'll stay flat. And what happens is, people are self-organizing. And so teams start to arise, whether you do it intentionally or not. So what you said, in light of what we're thinking about right now and some of the changes we're going through, says a lot. Like, I mean, if you want to structure, I think it's got to be done purposely, no matter how flat you want it to be. And I've always been, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs probably are, people that naturally kind of are resistant to structure. So to implement it feels different, but you've got to really do it with intention. That's one to really think on for me.
Yeah, structure and behavior are real big findings of the studies that were done by Richard Hackman and Ruth Wegman at Harvard. That their theory, and I don't want to get too far into it, was that if you had certain conditions in place, you had a much higher percentage of having a high performing team, because most teams just are only 20% are high performing across the nation. Whether it's airlines, whether it's marketing, sales, it doesn't matter. It's a very low percentage, and that was what they found. Anyway, don't get too far off. Yeah, it's fun stuff. It's really cool stuff when you start doing the reading. And we'll share the book with you as soon as we can. What do you think has happened in your restructuring or COVID-19 may be enduring for you guys? I know that you've always been pretty much a virtual team. Mm-hmm. So for you, probably not a lot has changed there. But what do you think has changed for you guys that probably will be sustained?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. So, I mean, a lot of the changes that kind of COVID has acted as a catalyst for, and kind of forcing people to work remotely and think differently about productivity is stuff that was already a part of what we were doing. So for the longest time, it was a competitive advantage. And now I don't think it's probably going to be as much of one anymore, right? So as we think about what that looks like, the things we're really leaning into is we always want to be optimized around value and kind of the best way to provide the biggest impact for our clients, and obviously charging appropriately for that and kind of figuring out where that appropriate balance is. And as we do that, there are all the remote changes and stuff that we've made years and years and years ago are going to be intact. And then as we continue to lean into that, some of the things that we're thinking about is we've already done, we have unlimited paid time off. We have, flex time in terms of when you're working and when you get your stuff done. So now the things we're starting to lean into is how do we give people a better sense of kind of psychology of like feeling some level of completeness. Because I think that's one of the things where especially people who work remotely and who work on anything digital is you can just put your nose to the grindstone and work all day and not feel like
Yeah.
enough has been done because there's always more. And so how do we get people to a place where you can feel comfortable to say like, great, like I'm going to take a day, or like I'm going to have a little bit more space.
Mm-hmm.
Or one of the things we're considering is if we look at moving into like a 4-day work week, what does that look like? And can we do that without a drop in productivity? And what does that mean for us in terms of increasing efficiency to get there? And so just really being focused on, efficiency and outcomes, and building the appropriate structure and changing that structure when necessary.
Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned, I never thought of that you lost your not competitive edge, but a piece of your competitive edge, because now everybody's virtual. It used to be something you could sell. Hey, we're virtual. But you also brought up something pretty interesting, and that is the fact that this idea of what I would call virtual culture, that companies that are going to be, who are first to get to establishing a virtual culture, and I'm not just talking about, let's do virtual luncheons and coffee breaks and let's do parties and stuff like that. How do you create a virtual culture that that really energizes people? And I mean, there are days that I'm zoomed out, right? I mean, I have so many Zoom. At the end of the day, I said, please, no more Zooms.
I'm done.
Now, I was Zoom, 2 years ago when it first came up. Not when it first came up, but I was kind of not a bleeding edge adopter. I'm always one standard deviation beyond bleeding edge because I know the history of bleeding edge stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but I've been involved with it with CEOs for almost 2 years now. And so I'm used to using it, but not to the extent that now I'm having to shift my business to I'm a platform guy. I've done a lot of platform teaching, instruction, and coaching with hands-on, but now I have to do it more virtually. And that's making it, I like the idea because it's challenging, but I have to figure out, how do I keep myself from getting completely zoomed out, so to speak. If you were to give advice to yourself, I mean, I know you've been in business for a while. Go back 10 years, maybe, I don't know, or 5 years, whatever's appropriate for you. What advice would you give your former self? If you were starting this company all over again, what advice would you be giving yourself? Somebody came to you, a buddy says, I'm thinking of starting a company, a digital marketing company.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, I mean, I think a lot of it is more probably philosophical advice. So growing up, like a lot of what I was surrounded by was like, hard work. I was born in Pittsburgh, raised in Southern Virginia. My dad works at a shipyard. And so it's like, all right, you like lean in and you do the hard work. And then a lot of the praise for like entrepreneurs or even less entrepreneurs, but, more like small business owners was like, long hours, like put in the work, like it might be hard work, but it's worthwhile. And so kind of gravitated towards like hard work, maybe to the point where it was like making work harder than it needed to be. And so it wasn't until I think more recently that I realized, it's also should be optimized around the outcome. And so think about what you're aiming to get out. And then, you can put a lot of time in and feel really productive and not be, really achieving a whole lot in terms of outcomes.
Yeah.
And so kind of consistently setting up feedback loops for yourself to figure out like, okay, what did I get out of what I put in and how do you optimize that on an ongoing basis would be probably the biggest piece of advice.
Great advice. Great advice. Don't practice. We used to call it in the Marine Corps. You don't need to practice bleeding.
That's a valid point. I love that. So
there's a piece of research. Again, I go back to this piece of research that came out of Harvard. I want to run it by you and see what you think of it.
Yeah.
They've determined that there are only probably 3 things that determine whether a team is successful. And you might want to know what they are, right? One is, and this is after thousands of teams, observing thousands of teams. There are 3 measures. One measure is, does the person on the team himself or herself, have they grown and learned, and grown from being on the team, number one? And you can think of it on a Likert scale of, 1 to 7 or 1 to 10. Have they gotten 1 low, 10 high? Have they gotten anything by being on the team? Have they learned and grown? Number 1. Number 2, has the team itself, as a team, has that grown and learned? Has it gotten better at doing what it's supposed to do, what the team thinks it's supposed to do? And the third thing is, has it met its general objectives? What was set at the beginning of the year? And those objectives are based on stakeholders. So in your case, it'd be, your board of advisors, or maybe your customers, you set some goals. And if you've met many of those goals, if you have a team that seems to be growing and learning and prospering, if you have individuals saying, yeah, I'm really a better person for being on this team, those three measures together really give you a pretty good indication of a team that's being successful and highly performing. I just wondered if you wanted to reflect on those at all. Have you seen any of that?
No, it's fascinating because you kind of think about it now, you start to look through that lens. And so, can certainly see we use the catalytic coaching model as like a big part of what we go through. So a big part of what we talk about is like, how do we grow individually and how do we grow as a team? And then what's been interesting is around the objectives we've set out for ourselves, we've achieved every year, sometimes in spite of ourselves. So I think that's an interesting one to really be thinking about, because it was in some cases, areas where we were growing and you see kind of growth and expansion in different directions. And was that always unifying towards the objective? And, where is a bit of straying from the path good? Because it gives you a chance to explore things you might not have otherwise considered. And when is too much of that, meandering? Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah, it's interesting stuff. And typically what teams do is in the beginning of when they launch or relaunch, you define what those things are and you mess with them over time. You tweak them and you change them. But oftentimes senior teams are involved with things like growing their leadership team, growing their profitability, managing succession, and all those kinds of things. Do you have any particular leaders that you've admired over the years? You said you'd studied Costco and you looked at other people. Yeah, they don't have to be famous. I just didn't know if you had anybody that you've looked at over the years and thought, oh, that's a pretty cool guy or woman.
Yeah. So, there's certainly, I'm trying to think about like the different types of leaders I've seen. The ones I've certainly learned the most from, one is a guy named Charlie Jones, who he runs a branding firm up in Maryland called Brand Intersection Group. And we've all sat in the room with somebody that is like 5 steps ahead of you at all points and is like dumbing down what they're saying, like in an effort to communicate with you, almost like they're a higher species of being. And Charlie is just one of those guys. Like he's solved the puzzle and is now trying to help you solve the puzzle while you talk through it. And it might have been a problem you brought to him 5 minutes ago. You've been thinking about it for days. And he's just like, okay, let me help you get there.
Interesting.
He's pretty amazing. Another guy named Joey Coleman, who does customer experience. He speaks on that topic all over the world. But just very, very, very good at what he does and lets his work speak for him. And otherwise just very humble. Whereas I feel like a lot of people, especially in leadership positions right now, maybe this is due partly to social media, feel a need to kind of beat their chest or, be the cheerleader or kind of put a lot of ego out there. And that's, maybe that's something with me that I just react poorly to that kind of self-aggrandizement, but I tend not to be a big fan of that. So seeing Joey in a world where a lot of his peers do that was, certainly fascinating.
Well, I'm with you. I think we do too much of that. One last question, and this is a question that was developed by a guy that's a pretty famous guy named Richard Boyatzis. He's done a lot of research on leadership and on coaching. He's done a lot of the sort of base research on coaching, why coaching works, when it doesn't, how it doesn't. He's worked on fMRI studies, that kind of thing. He's very,
interesting.
Very technical, very, very smart guy, and he's at Case Western Reserve, and he has a book called Helping People. And in Helping People, he does an exercise, and I'm going to put you on the spot for 2 minutes here and then then I'll let you go. And what he says is, if you can get clients, his whole idea is you always want to coach clients to the positive, not to the negative, not to avoid things, but things that they want to attain, that enjoins the parasympathetic brain and it relaxes the brain and makes it more open and more subject to change, as opposed to shutting down with fear and loathing.
Yeah, I can see how people would put up their walls. That makes sense.
Their walls, yeah. So one of the questions he asks is he asks his clients and I use this all the time with mine now, and I say, what do you want to be in? Where, it's 10, it's 15 years out. Where do you want to be then? What do you envision that you could be then? So that's my question. You're 10 or 15 years from now, where do you see yourself?
Oh, that's an interesting one. I mean, I'm sure people think about this all the time, but it now happens to be a very poignant time where I'm sure a lot of people with the additional time and space are thinking about that more than maybe they would normally. Yeah, I mean, for me, it's like a online web comic, but the philosophy of it was, it takes you, I think, according to Gladwell, what is it, 10,000 hours, which is
10,000 hours,
maybe a little bit made up, but the idea of the premise, I think, holds true. You have to put a lot of time in to be really good at something.
Yeah.
And that it takes about 7 years to master something. So if you took, a full lifespan, like you've got maybe 10, 11, 12 lives, depending on when you start mastering things. And would you do the same thing all the way through, or knowing you only have one life to live, would you try to, master a bunch of different things? And so that's what was interesting is as the company started, I got to do, I was basically freelance marketing consultants and coding and doing all of that. And now as we hit this next phase, it's a little bit more that leadership side. And so then when we get back into, whatever that 5, 10, whatever years in the future looks like, I know one of the things I'd like to try my hand at is writing, more. That's the one that comes to mind right now. I mean, there's lots of options out there.
Yeah. So one of the things I would suggest you try is to actually write out what that vision is. And actually write out, say, it's 10 years from now, I'm writing a book, I'm writing a novel that's going to be published by so-and-so. And then what ends up happening, according to him, is that your brain starts to work toward that unconsciously pretty quickly.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll send you a review of that book. I did a summary of it. I'll send you that summary. You might.
That'd be great. Yeah, I'd love to see that.
It's great to do prior to an offsite or things like that for people. It's an amazing exercise, and everybody I've used it with to coach and coaching, whether they be your age or older or younger, the coaching has gone better when we start with that question.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Listen, thanks for taking the time. I didn't mean to put you on the spot so much, but I thought maybe it was kind of fun. It was kind of fun.
No,
thanks
I appreciate
so much.
it.
And this has been Steve Gladys with Chris Yoko and CEO of YokoCo. And we really appreciate the time, Chris. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve.